This message is brought to you by Apple Card. Apple Card takes privacy seriously. It's your card, your info, your business. So if your credit card isn't Apple Card, maybe it should be. Subject to credit approval. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA Salt Lake City branch. Terms and more at applecard.com.
Make your next move with American Express Business Platinum. Earn 5 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. And with a welcome offer of 150,000 points after you spend $20,000 on purchases on the card within your first 3 months of membership, your business can soar to new heights. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum. Amex Business Platinum. Built for business by American Express.
I got a call into the office about a disturbance.
On July 18th, the film studio A24 released director Ari Aster's Eddington. Marketed as a sort of black comedy western, Eddington is about a small community in New Mexico during May 2020. So, a COVID-19 movie, basically.
Well, here's a quote from you. Arm yourselves.
I don't mean literal arms.
But it was a big COVID movie with a stacked cast that included Emma Stone, Pedro Pascal, and Austin Butler. The reported budget was $25 million, which, granted, isn't Marvel money, but it was a huge step up from a studio that typically released low-budget indie films, like, for example, Aster's previous films, Hereditary and Midsommar, both of which were made for $10 million or less.
I mean, if you look back to the beginnings of A24, most of their films were way, way smaller in scale. You know, they were picking up things that other distributors and studios had dropped. So it is a significant scaling up relative to that kind of earlier era of A24 and is representative, I think, of where they're headed as a studio.
That's Alex Barish, a culture editor at The New Yorker, and he writes about the entertainment industry. A24 set out to disrupt Hollywood, and part of that was being a place where talent wanted to work.
They have a kind of echelon of auteurs that they work with over and over again, and the promise that they make to these people, you know, I spoke to dozens of directors for this piece, is really that they will get to make the movie they want to make. You know, when A24 give notes, it's more of a suggestion than a mandate. They're really trying to protect the creative vision of the filmmaker, and they basically say, you make the movie you want to make, and we'll figure out how to sell it to a wider public.
Which is, historically, not how these things work.
The conventional wisdom in Hollywood, especially among the sort of legacy Big Five studios, is that in order to have a commercial success, you need to appeal to all 4 quadrants. You need to hit both men and women and people under and over the age of 25. So you really can't offend anyone. And also the standard practice is to develop an idea within a studio and then attach a director after the fact. What A24 does differently is that they will develop the idea in tandem with the filmmakers. So often they're looking for things that are very buzzy and sort of speak to the zeitgeist, so they'll lean into things that the more traditional Hollywood studios have historically been afraid of.
So if they're not using that 4-quadrant approach, how do they make the business work if the things that they produce are pretty niche?
You know, a top executive said to me that they're built to hit singles and doubles. They're not trying to make a hit that makes $400 million and then covers the rest of the business. And they've also made a name for themselves as a place that will do these kind of strange, specific films, and they've built up a following for that. And those people have really come to believe that any A24 movie, you know, they'll show up for it.
But lately, A24 has been taking some big swings, maybe trying for a triple or even a home run. And not just with Eddington. The upcoming Timothée Chalamet ping-pong movie, Marty Supreme, and the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson wrestling movie, The Smashing Machine, are both reportedly costing the studio $70 million apiece. The studio also just launched A24 Labs, a division created explicitly to come up with AI tools for it to use. Alex says, for a studio that cut its teeth on small-budget films made by auteurs, working with AI is a little awkward.
You know, they're excited about this technology and they want to find ways for it to work, but a lot of the auteurs that they've made their names with are very uncomfortable with that. Ari Aster, who made Eddington, has also made his feelings about AI very clear. And in fact, one of the kind of villains of Eddington is this ominous tech corporation that seems to be dipping a toe into AI and is taking over the town of Eddington. And so it is a question of whether their filmmakers will be receptive to this.
Today on the show, when AI and big money come into the picture, literally, can a studio like A24 maintain what makes it unique? I'm Shayna Roth, filling in for Lizzie O'Leary, and you're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick around.
At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality walking shoes, which might lead to another discovery.
40,000 steps, baby. Who's on top now, Karen?
You've taken the office step challenge a step too far. Don't worry, though. Sierra also has yoga gear. It might be a good place to find your zen. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
If you're running a business, you know every customer matters. Whether you're a one-person operation or have a large team that needs better collaboration tools, OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system that streamlines and scales your customer communications. OpenPhone works through an app on your phone or computer, and your team can share one number and collaborate on customer calls and texts like a shared inbox. Plus, OpenPhone's AI agent can be set up in minutes to handle calls after hours, answer questions, and capture leads, so you never miss a customer. See why over 60,000 businesses trust OpenPhone to manage their business's calls and texts. OpenPhone is offering What Next TBD listeners 20% off the first 6 months at openphone.com/TBD. That's OPENPHONE.com/TBD. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone. No missed calls, no missed customers. I want to take a little trip back in time and get to speak in movie terms, the origin story of A24. How did the studio first come on the scene?
So A24 was founded in New York in 2012, which was kind of a rough patch for indie film. Superhero movies were on the rise. The Avengers came out that year, so you can feel the kind of MCU fever building. And companies like Miramax, which had made indies this viable commercial enterprise in the 80s and 90s, had become a lot more interested in catering to older audiences, putting out period dramas and Oscar bait. And A24's founders were these 3 guys in their 30s, Daniel Katz, David Fenkel, and John Hodges. And they basically decided that they wanted to put out art house movies for their own generation. And again, yeah, this is also right when social media was getting big. So they thought, we don't have to pay for billboards. We don't have to pay for TV ads. Let's keep it cheap. Let's be very online and let's try to go viral. And to a great extent, they did succeed in that.
One of the things that I've always found interesting about A24 and that really set them apart in their early days was their unique aesthetic. If you had to explain to someone who had never seen an A24 film, how would you define it?
I do feel like the more A24 movies you watch, and I watched many of them for this story, the harder it becomes to define a singular sensibility. But each of their films really has the stamp of its creator all over it. And, sometimes that means it's mining their personal lives. If you look at something like Greta Gerwig's Lady Bird, she prepped her cast and crew by sharing her yearbooks with them from high school. Or if you look at Lulu Wang's The Farewell, that's taken directly from her family history and her experience. I would also say they're really known for elevated genre movies. So I'm thinking about Alex Garland's Ex Machina, which is about a Turing test being conducted on this beautiful android, and also kind of about AI. I'm thinking about Ari Aster's early movies like Hereditary, which is this kind of demonic family drama, Midsommar, which is this very brightly lit pagan horror movie. They all have a kind of aesthetic that is unlike what you would see in mainstream Hollywood, generally speaking.
And I mean, this has really worked well for A24. I mean, I don't know of any other studio that has its own fan club. What is it about them that moviegoers really like?
Yeah, that is definitely unusual. I don't know anyone who's running to see a movie because it was put out by Lionsgate, for example. But A24, I think because they've kept a low profile and because they have become known for these very auteur-driven projects, they've kind of made the auteurs the brand, and they've made people feel that by supporting the studio, they're supporting these creative filmmakers who are getting to execute their visions. And yeah, there are merch drops that go with every movie. There are these kind of... they really want people to feel involved in the films themselves and feel like they're supporting something that is independent and artistic. And you know, there are other players coming up like Neon and Mubi that are trafficking in similar terrain. But when A24 first came out, there was really nothing like that in the landscape.
And A24 is not just popular among the people going to see the movies. Filmmakers seem to really like working with them and keep coming back. What are the filmmakers getting out of their relationship with A24?
I think the filmmakers that I spoke to, at least, are getting a truly collaborative relationship. You know, they get the freedom to make the movie they want to make. Barry Jenkins told me he had carte blanche on Moonlight. Sofia Coppola told me that A24 will let her do whatever she wants. And I think there's a sense that they will let you execute the vision you want to execute. And then even when it comes to the marketing, it's a conversation. You know, that often the directors are working with the marketing execs on trailers and they're strategizing with them on the social stuff. So you can have as much ownership over your movie as you want. And that kind of freedom is appealing, although obviously A24 have not historically been able to offer the kind of budgets that other companies do. They're really like, we'll back you to the hilt on what you're trying to make.
So now A24 is in this sort of transitional period where it wants to make bigger movies. And we've seen some of this. We saw that with Civil War starring Kirsten Dunst. And also earlier this year around the springtime, we saw Warfare. How do these movies compare to what the studio had been making in its early days?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest difference, as you alluded to, is the difference in budget. Most of the movies that A24 was making at the beginning or putting out at the beginning were much cheaper. You know, they were picking up movies from festivals for a couple $1 million. Moonlight, which was the first movie they produced themselves, had a budget of $750,000, which is extremely small. Civil War, which you mentioned, had a budget of $50 million. So that is just head and shoulders above anything else that they'd put out. And I think, you know, you see with that there's a bit more risk involved and they can't really push buttons in quite the same way as they did in the past. With Civil War, it's set in this kind of conflict-riven America. There's a president who's in his third term, but we don't know what party he's from. The politics are kind of confused. Texas and California have for some reason allied themselves. And you saw in the marketing, again, because it's a bigger budget movie and maybe they can't afford to alienate huge swaths of the audience in the way that they could with these smaller things, they're not really positioning it as a political film. They're positioning it as a mainstream action movie. And that worked for them. It did make back, you know, it grossed something like $120 million worldwide. So it more than made back, you know, twice its budget. But it presaged a kind of more careful period for the studio in terms of how it's talking about its movies and playing online.
So why is this transition happening now, of all times? Where does that put the studio in the greater Hollywood context, especially considering their indie roots?
I mean, I think it's happening now partly because a lot of these auteurs that they worked with at the beginning are wanting to take these steps, partly because they've grown, they have this fan base, they feel like they're ready and they can move to a new stage. But it has put them in an awkward position because they have Neon and Mubi, these indie distributors coming up behind them, and they have the bigger players at the top that they're now having to compete with in these different contexts. So they're sort of squeezed in between. And yeah, if you look at some of the early filmmakers like Robert Eggers, who made The Witch and The Lighthouse for A24, he sort of graduated to focus features for The Northman and Nosferatu, which was a big hit last year. And part of the reason for that was that they gave him more money. So A24, in order to compete and retain these people, has to grow. But in growing, it risks losing what made it distinctive in the first place.
There are already some warning signs that the quality is fading. Civil War and Warfare got mostly great reviews. But then there's Death of a Unicorn. It's a 2025 black comedy about entitled rich jerks who kill a unicorn and get, spoiler alert, hunted down and slaughtered by the unicorn's parents. The Gore Fest got a 53% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and it managed to just break even with its $15 million budget. For A24, it was a rare miss.
At their best, they're meeting the zeitgeist. And in that instance, it felt like they had looked around and said, oh, eating the rich is in right now. So what can we do in that vein? And it just felt late in a way that the best of A24 really does not.
Whenever I think of A24 and what they're trying to do, I can't help but think of Miramax, which started out as this, very similar indie darling kind of place. They quote unquote discovered Quentin Tarantino and started all of this like really big resurgence of indie films in like the 90s. And then they started to try and go real big, and they did like Shakespeare in Love and all of these other sort of like much bigger budgets, and they won awards. And granted, there's like a Harvey Weinstein element to a lot of it, but the shine of Miramax was long gone even before Harvey Weinstein was exposed. And I wonder if A24 is sort of heading in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the cautionary tale. When the founders were first kind of dreaming up A24, they talked a lot about Miramax as something that in its heyday had been what they wanted to achieve. It was a company that, through very aggressive, smart marketing, actually did manage to make indie films a mainstream phenomenon. They put out Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and they were really pushing the envelope in that way. And yeah, as they got bigger and started chasing Oscars and catering to Oscar voters and to a kind of aging demographic, they started to resemble the studios that they had set out to quote unquote disrupt. And I think that is, in the same way as early Miramax was the aspiration, I think late Miramax is the cautionary tale that A24 will have to avoid. You don't want to become the thing that you set out to change.
After the break, will AI change the soul of A24? How many SaaS applications are being used at your company right now? Can't keep count? You're not alone. Trellica by 1Password helps you discover and secure access to all your SaaS apps, even unmanaged shadow IT. Trellica by 1Password inventories every app in use at your company. Then the app pre-populates profiles to assess risk, letting you manage access, optimize spend, and enforce security best practices across every app your employees use. Manage shadow IT, securely onboard and offboard employees, and meet compliance goals. Trellica by 1Password provides a complete solution for SaaS access governance and is just one of the ways that extended access management helps teams strengthen compliance and security. With regular third-party audits and the industry's largest bug bounty, 1Password exceeds the standards set by various authorities and is a leader in security. Take the first step to better security for your team by securing credentials and protecting every application, even unmanaged shadow IT. Learn more at 1password.com TBD. That's 1password.com TBD, all lowercase.
This message is brought to you by Apple Card. Did you know Apple Card is designed to help you pay off your balance faster with smart payment suggestions? And because fees don't help you, Apple Card doesn't have any. So if your credit card isn't Apple Card, maybe it should be. Subject to credit approval. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA Salt Lake City branch. Variable APRs range from 18.24% to 28.49% based on creditworthiness. Rates as of July 1st, 2025. Terms and more at applecard.com.
Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
A24 had become popular enough that Variety reported that the studio was courting a buyout for $3 billion. And for context on that, Amazon purchased MGM for $8.6 billion. But they're still independent. So talk to me about how they're finding the money for the large projects that they're trying to finance without partnering with other big studios or basically selling out.
Yeah, I mean, the money is coming from Wall Street. I did talk to executives about this, and I spoke to other people in the industry about various attempts to buy them. It seems to happen every couple of years that somebody wants to take a piece of A24, and they've always wanted to kind of go their own way. And they've said, an executive said to me that Hollywood has 100 years of context and 100 years of doing things a certain way. And they have this fixation with innovation and this feeling that they're doing something different, and they don't really want to be dragged into what the main studios are doing. And so instead, they've gone the Wall Street route and they've done multiple funding rounds. They now have a $3.5 billion valuation. And the choices that they're making in terms of who invests in them and who they court reflect that, reflect that impulse. Like one of their major backers is Thrive Capital, and Thrive is also a major backer of OpenAI. And A24 executives told me that they had specifically sought out Thrive because of those AI connections. They said, this is the technology that's coming, and we want to be on the ground floor, and you guys know what you're doing. So, let's team up.
So partly because of that Thrive Capital relationship, A24 is looking to integrate AI into their business. Obviously, when we say AI, there's an incredible number of possibilities of what that could look like and what it could mean. Do they have a plan yet of how they want to integrate AI into the A24 system?
Yeah, so they founded a tech division called A24 Labs in January. That was this year. It's still very new. We don't really know what it will be, and I don't think they know quite what it'll be. The refrain among the people that I spoke to was that they're still exploring. But it's led by this guy, Scott Belsky, who came over from Adobe in January. And his mandate, according to the people that I spoke with, is partly to develop tools for internal use. So it has nothing to do with, VFX and storyboarding and the things that we've seen from other studios. What they're interested in on that front is things like audience discovery. So understanding who the super fans are and how they behave. But he has said on Substack, because he loves to post, that his goal is to, quote, help the world's greatest creators take more creative risk by making it easier to explore the full landscape of their imagination. And he's gone on this kind of listening tour, sitting down with filmmakers. He's written about use cases that he's interested in, and they're sort of from the ideation phase onward. He's posited a deep conversation with an LLM about a character's mindset could be a good use of AI. A request for a dozen scenarios for what might happen next in a movie could be a use case. And pre-visualizing characters, costumes, scenes, so sort of imagining what it could look like before you even get into the production phase. And another executive at A24 told me that there's talent that's toe dipping into this, and they want Scott to be able to they want Belsky to be able to guide those people. So there are a lot of different use cases that are floating around, some of them to do with film, some of them to do with marketing and internal plans. And the hope is that he can do it all.
It's so funny to hear you quoting Belsky with these sort of super rose-colored glasses view of AI, because you also quoted some creators. You quoted Daniel Kwan, the co-director of Everything Everywhere All at Once, an A24 film that won Oscars and is one of my personal favorites. And he describes AI as, quote, fundamentally incompatible with our institutions. And he called on studios to form, quote, a unified front against the tech industry. I mean, larger studios can kind of brush this off and just be like, well, creatives are going to creative and we'll get somebody else somewhere else. But A24 has a reputation for being a partner with filmmakers. So do we know how A24's conversations with filmmakers have been going since they started in this direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super new, but this is going to be extremely fraught for them. Another big part of the way that they work, as you kind of alluded to, is that they're very relationship driven. They want filmmakers to feel at home there. They want them to feel like they have a say. And I think a lot of filmmakers feel that AI is a threat to what they do and how they do it. So I don't quite know how they're going to navigate this. And, maybe there will be people who are more into it than others, but I think it's going to be something that is extremely delicate for them if they want to preserve the goodwill that they have in the indie film world and beyond.
Do you have a sense of how the rest of Hollywood is dealing with the prospect of AI? I know that was one of the big contentious parts of the strikes, the writer strike, director strike that were happening a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think this feels pretty existential to a lot of people on the creative side. But if you look at big studios, you see deals being struck with generative AI companies. I'm thinking about Lionsgate, which put out John Wick and The Hunger Games and these big action franchises, and they made a deal with a startup called Runway and essentially offered their whole content library in exchange for a custom AI model that they can use for editing and visual effects and so on. And A24, as far as I learned in my reporting, is not doing anything like that. They wanted to build their own operation internally from the ground up. But these kinds of deals with Runway and other startups are not unusual in the broader landscape.
Do you buy A24's claim that they are not going to foist AI on their writers and directors that they work with? Or do you think they're just kind of trying to appease people for now?
I would like to buy it. I do.
I'm sure the directors do too.
Yes. I mean, look, I feel that they are really at a crossroads with this technology. And I think if they tried to impose it on people, it would end very badly for them. And they made their names being a place where you could make the movie you wanted to make. And one would hope that they will uphold that end of their branding. But we really don't know. You know, we're 6-7 months into the existence of A24 Labs. So I guess we'll see how things progress. But I hope that it's an option rather than a mandate.
Alex, I always love talking movies, and this was a fabulous conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was very fun.
Alex Barish is a culture writer at The New Yorker. All right, that is it for our show today. What Next TBD is produced by Evan Campbell and Patrick Fort. Our show is edited by Paige Osborne. Mia Lobel is the executive producer at Slate. TBD is part of the larger What Next family. And if you're looking for even more Slate podcasts to listen to, I highly suggest you check out Monday's episode of Care and Feeding. It's back to school season, and the hosts dig into helping their kid talk to their crush, moving houses, and how to make your home the teen hangout spot. We'll be back next week with more episodes. I'm Shayna Roth, filling in for Lizzie O'Leary. Thanks for listening.
I'm Chris Hadfield. I'm an astronaut, an author, a citizen of planet Earth. Join me for a 6-part journey into the systems that power the world. Real conversations with real people who are shaping the future of energy. No politics, no empty talk, just solutions-focused conversations on the challenges we must overcome and the possibilities that lie ahead. This is On Energy.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV, it's a new way to experience driving. The fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. The next chapter of Audi is here.